Okay, hi everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started because I'm seeing this clock tick down, and I know you're going to want to hear from this group up here, and we're going to be squeezing a lot into 45 minutes. So thank you all for coming to join our session today. One of the most important topics on the planet, and that is Alzheimer's disease and brain health. So I often start one of these panels with raise your hand if you know someone with dementia or someone who's caring for someone with dementia. Take a quick look around. This is not an orphan disease. We are talking about a disease that is going to cripple our country and countries around the world as our population ages because we've been so successful with other disease states and therapeutic areas. So this is a cause for celebration, but it's also something that if we don't get a handle on very, very quickly, we are going to dramatically change not just our families, which is happening today, as all of you will know because of your experience, but also our social systems and our financial systems. So today, Alzheimer's disease affects 6 million Americans, and that number is expected to double by 2050. I don't know about you, but 50 is the new 30, 70 is the new 50, and once you turn 80, you have a 50% likelihood of having cognitive impairment. But our science, we are at this inflection curve right now around innovation. And just a decade ago, you couldn't actually confirm an Alzheimer's diagnosis without a biopsy. Brain biopsy. And there's not too many living people who volunteered for brain biopsies. So we had this wonderful advent of PET imaging, and we could actually see the Alzheimer's disease pathology in a living brain. And what we realized is that we have been treating this disease way too late. The amyloid plaques that are the hallmark pathology of this disease start 10 to 20 years before symptoms. And I don't know about you, but I don't know of a single disease state where the outcomes are better if we catch it later. I don't want my cancer diagnosed at stage 4. I want it caught at stage 1, and that's what we need to do with Alzheimer's disease. So early impact matters. Early detection, accurate diagnosis, and real progress means you need to have a healthy ecosystem, all the way from mouse models and in vitro models through the diagnostic cascade into translational research, clinical care, and making sure that the innovations that get through the regulatory system, whether those be diagnostics or therapeutics, can actually get to the bedside. I do this presentation all over the world. There's no place I'm prouder to live than here in Indiana, because I can tell you I've been to almost every state to give this presentation. I've been in multiple countries, and I don't know a single place who has the kind of ecosystem like we have here in Indiana. Sometimes people think of us as a flyover state, right? That's that place that I go from New York to San Francisco. Well, I'm here to tell you, Indiana punches way above our weight when it comes to Alzheimer's research, and that's across academia, clinical care, and industry. We're going to talk to some folks here from IU Health today. IU, Indiana University, ranks number 6 in the nation of NIA funding, and that's because we've got the best scientists here. So let's start with that. We're going to kind of walk our way through the development pipeline. And so I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. We've got Donna Wilcock. Actually, I don't know if it's right there. So I'm going to goof some of these titles because I just call her Donna and text her when I need her. So Donna Wilcock, the director of the Center for Neurodegeneration Disorders, and she's also here representing the Stark Neurosciences Research Institute. Jared Brosh, associate professor at IU Health and neurologist extraordinaire, the person that I call my phone a friend. Katie Hewitt, who's the founder and CEO of BioVenture Advisors and also a Lilly retiree from Lilly Ventures, and Derek Small, CEO of Monument Biosciences, who touches a whole lot of things here in our ecosystem. And we're really excited that Indy Bio Crossroads brought us all together to host this session. So Donna, we're going to start with the basics. And actually, Derek, you might want to jump in on this as well, because I know how closely you work with the Stark Institute. So how does the Stark Institute, so this is the Neuroscience Research Institute at IU, how do we actually turn these basic discoveries into something that's meaningful? You can talk a little bit about Model AD if you'd like, but how do we do this?
Yeah, so I would say I moved here 2 years ago. I was at another institution for 13 years, and I moved here because of the ecosystem that Phyllis is describing, which is that IU has really built literally a bench-to-bedside model that researchers can come in and contribute to and build towards. And so a couple of the really, I would say, unique innovations that have come through IU is we have, I think it's in year 8 now, of a Model AD Center, which is creating next generation mouse models to allow us to study Alzheimer's disease. And the reason that is so desperately needed, we've had, I don't want to knock too much on the animal models because we wouldn't be where we are with treatment without the animal models. But all of the animal models have been based on genetically inherited forms of Alzheimer's disease, which is those very rare cases, like 2% or less of Alzheimer's cases that occur in individuals' 30s and 40s. And so we take that human gene with that mutation and we overexpress it in a mouse, and they get a boatload of the amyloid plaques, and it lets us study them. But what it doesn't include is a lot of the factors that drive the 98% of the what we call sporadic Alzheimer's. And so you don't have the aging component, you don't have the lifestyle component, you don't have the multimorbidity component where we have diabetes and obesity and hypertension, and we can't incorporate all of those things into these genetic models. And so what IU set out to do, and again, it's in its 8th year, there are only 2 of these centers funded by the NIH in the US, and we are one of them, is to generate models that will better represent that 98% of sporadic Alzheimer's disease. And so we've learned a lot of lessons from that, because what we do when we look at those, we characterize the gene expression across the whole genome. We're looking at what different cells in the brain are doing at different ages. And it's led us to innovate, I would say, on some different pathways that are really emerging as the next generation pathways we're going to target, and that's inflammation. And so that led to the development of what is called the Treat AD Center at IU, which is, again, one of 2 centers funded by the NIH. And the Treat AD Center takes the models and the findings and the discoveries from Model AD, especially around inflammation, and does small molecule development and targeting. And that has, I'm going to hand over to Derek, because that's led us to a pipeline that is now moving into preclinical and clinical development.
Yeah, and I would just buttress that with, the special ingredients here too, I think, as we mentioned, as we're represented here as well, is Eli Lilly also here. Not just that Lilly is collaborating and doing the things, people are retiring. The talent that comes from Eli Lilly helps us, have a little bit more of an industry perspective on the academic side.
You might have a couple of Lilly retirees on this panel.
Yeah, absolutely, and probably in the audience too. But specifically for Treat AD. So when Treat AD was established and the grant that they received, that was when a guy named Alan Palkowitz, who I don't think is in the audience here, but he's now the CEO of IBRI as well, left Lilly with job offers on both coasts to lead research at multiple, large institutions or large pharma companies, and decided to write a 500-page grant and with Bruce and team, and they were awarded that grant. And by getting that, they were then able to build essentially an industry-scale drug discovery team that then allowed to take these, kind of novel next generation, as Donna said, discoveries for different targets for Alzheimer's disease that are different than really what the way industry is great, right? I mean, but if industry could solve every problem, we wouldn't necessarily have academia. I mean, academia is the one out there kind of pushing the next envelope, and so to put industry on top of that and actually make molecules that could be developed into drugs as opposed to just even kind of probes, that's really created a completely different dynamic, and the opportunity to work with a clinical team right next door. So Jared is literally right next door to the Stark, and then you're able to really share that information, and they do it in a way that also is not like, as you said, not only do we punch above our weight in productivity, I mean, people actually like each other inside of the Institute. They communicate, they have, open meetings, open conversations, they share data, they share resources, and it's really a great place to do research in a place that's also treating and helping patients too. And I think that's always, in full disclosure, I'm particularly a little bit biased because my mother happens to think that Jared is the best doctor on the planet because he treated my uncle as well, and she really loves
He
Jared.
is the best doctor on the planet, and we won't give out his cell phone number.
Thank you.
No,
for that.
I think it's really important, Derek. A couple of key things here. One is you've heard us talk about amyloid, and one of the things that obviously is very exciting is that we have 2 new therapies for the first time in 35 years. 35 years, we actually have new therapies for Alzheimer's disease. Can someone give me a hallelujah? I mean, come on, 35 years, we have not had anything new. But these aren't the end-all be-all. Just like cancer or some of the other therapeutic areas that we've all been excited about the progress. So what do we need to do next, right? And so you're talking about what's the next mechanism of action? What's the next amyloid or animal model? What's the next set of biomarkers that we need? One of the things that's a challenge with animal models is you're talking about the brain, right? So cognitive assessments and things like that are very, very difficult to assess in animals. So this flow that goes immediately from early translational research to the ability to do new companies and new startups that are coming right out of the lab is pretty exciting. Now, one of the other things that's exciting is Bill Gates has taken an interest in Indiana. He actually funded one of the very first Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative projects, which if we have a little bit of time to talk about, Donna and Jared were very involved in that. And because of that and some of the work that was being done in biomarkers, which is a really important thing as part of Alzheimer's disease, he decided to come visit IU. And so what was really special about this, and Derek, Donna, a lot of us were in the room, and I'd like Derek for you to comment on kind of what kind of energy this created. But to your point, the medical school, the dean of the medical school and the CEO of IU Health, Dennis Murphy, they were sitting next to each other. And they like each other. And they talk to each other. I spend a whole lot of time at academic centers where the medical center and the head of the medical school is actually actively fighting against the health system. And we have this wonderful synergy between the research and the clinical care that I think is exceptionally unique here in Indiana and at IU. And so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that was a
experience.
really cool thing. We actually call it the Bill Gates tour now. So now when we bring investors or other people through, we try to, mimic parts of that tour, which was captured in a lot of pictures and videos, is posted on LinkedIn. So it was great exposure. Because it is hard, we're Hoosiers, we're in the Midwest, we do have flyover, realities of what it gets held here. So like explaining to someone that this actually could be one of the best places in the world to do neuroscience research and treat Alzheimer's patients is a little bit hard to believe. And so it's until they get here. But, so having a guy like Bill come and do that, I think was extraordinary. And I do also think, when everybody kind of puts the emphasis on the patients and getting better, and then you see progress and you see everybody working towards those goals, and you have that leadership up front who used to be here was Anantha Shaker, Dennis Murphy. These are people who really care about patients, and I think that helped it, and that's probably part of why Bill was attracted to come here as well.
Yeah, he walked away saying there's something special going on there. There's something unique. Everybody's in the room together. They're talking to each other. And I heard Dennis later say to the dean of the medical school, we need to talk to each other more often. And I was like, gosh, I think you guys are doing great, but keep it up. So Jared, you sit at this interface between research and clinical care. And so you probably, well, and Donna, with running the Brain Health Navigator program, you do as well. But I'd like for you to talk to the group about what does that look like when you've got your clinical care, whether that's up at Saxony or anywhere where you're visiting, and of course the ADRC as well, and what that experience is like working here. By the way, the reason we're here with Jared is because we're in Indiana. I can't get him to fly anywhere to do presentations because he doesn't want to miss out on seeing his patients. So.
Oh my gosh. Thanks, Phyllis. Thank you. Working in clinical care in Indiana is really great and unique in so many ways. I mean, our healthcare system is an academic system, but there aren't necessarily competitors in the state. So we're unique in that the academic center has reaches that go to all parts of the state. And in that sense, our medical record systems are connected. We've got this wonderful information sharing system that is the CTSI, and it connects all the hospitals in central Indiana so we can share data. That is a really unique setup. Every other state is so fractionated when it comes to patient care that we can deliver better care, I think, in our state because of that. To parlay on what was said here too, you know, before we had huge developments in the Neuroscience Institute, we've been players in clinical trials for 30 to 40 years. And so we work with pharma companies and have for many years on phase 1 clinical trials where we're introducing a new drug to a human for the first time. And that ability and that infrastructure that we already have is helpful because we can take these new molecules that we're developing in mice and through TREAT-AD, we can take the first steps in humans, especially in conjunction with our business partners like Monument and so forth, to try to help innovate at a faster pace.
Yeah, and I think for some of you who do clinical trials and recruiting, you may not be aware of this, but it takes twice as long, sometimes 3 times as long, to recruit an Alzheimer's clinical trial as it does to run the trial. So where you think about like oncology, if someone gets diagnosed with cancer, they're almost often offered a trial as one of their, quote, care options to participate in a trial. That never happens in Alzheimer's disease. And if it happens too late because people aren't diagnosed early enough. They're not diagnosed accurately. So the other thing we have with this clinical and this research kind of synergy loop is Jared is actually able to talk with his patients. Nicole Fowler has been doing some work that's actually funded out of the University of Southern California Clinical Trial Recruitment Laboratory to actually pilot some initiatives of how do we make sure that we're feeding that clinical research from clinical practice. Having recruited 8 phase 3 studies, and I'm really tired of people calling me and saying, they say my mom has Alzheimer's disease, but she's too late for a clinical trial. Not only is that very frustrating for someone who knows that our research is slowed down, but we've also taken the choice away from that patient to be a potential clinical trial participant. And we know that that's something that's fulfilling and hope creating. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about how you make sure that compliantly and appropriately you're sharing those research opportunities with your clinical patients.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a really great infrastructure where we have a central person who can take any referral about any clinical trial neurologically related, and we try and help connect them with trials that are available. We've taken this, and this might be a good segue into our Brain Health Navigator program, where we now have a person who is in our primary care clinics helping work up and identify individuals who may have early cognitive impairment. And part of that pathway is also to let them know that they can get involved in clinical trials at any point. And that is an offering. And it may be something observational. It may be for caregivers. Or it may be something that involves a drug, because all of those folks are helpful in the entire understanding of the ecosystem and how we can support Alzheimer's disease in its entirety.
Yeah, so let's move to this Brain Health Navigator. Donna, will you talk a little bit about the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative? So this was the 3rd major global health initiative started by the World Economic Forum. Tedros actually launched it right before he declared COVID a pandemic. from the World Economic Forum in 2020. And the first sites, there were 7 sites in 6 countries. There were 2 in the US, and guess where one of them was? Indiana University. And so they received this Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative large grant, partially funded by Gates Ventures, the private office of Bill Gates. And now the team is starting to actually spin off some of these learnings, including the Brain Health Navigator. So Donna's running the Brain Health Navigator.
Yeah, so I don't know. I wouldn't say running it, but I don't want to take the credit for that. But I've been very involved in the implementation of this model, which is we have brain health navigators in primary care offices now, and we have neurology brain health navigators who are working with our patients receiving these new therapies that are very involved. Jared can talk about the screening process that is needed for these new medicines. But we're one of the leading centers in the country for delivering these new drugs to patients, and very safely too. But the model in the primary care clinic that we took was a digital cognitive assessment developed by Linus Health. And for the primary care provider, it gave them very easy information. So even though on the back end, there's a lot of bioinformatics happening and a lot of computing, the output for the primary care provider is simply a red, orange, or green. Red, this person definitely has some impairment. Orange, this person might have some impairment. Green, this person likely doesn't have cognitive impairment. Individuals who screened orange and red were then referred to our primary care brain health navigator. And this was a community health worker that we had trained and educated in dementia care, memory care. They then contacted the patient, invited them back to do a bigger workup, because obviously this one 5-minute test isn't really enough to help you diagnose, but bring them back, give them a more comprehensive screening, which is still only about 20 minutes to do this MOCA assessment, and then with that information, offer them an array of options that they could pursue. One is they don't want to pursue anything. And there's a lot of people out there who know they have memory problems and they don't want to think about it or deal with it. They just want to get on with things. And that's fine. And primary care will support them. Some people just want to do lifestyle intervention type things, and they're referred to geriatrics or to neurology. Those people who are interested in doing whatever they can, whether it's a trial or they want to see if they qualify for these new drugs, they then get referred to our neurology brain health navigators, who will then move them forward, and they ultimately see Jared. But what we heard a lot from primary care providers when we said, why are you not, because over 65, everyone should be getting some kind of cognitive screening at their annual visit. But that doesn't happen 80% of the time. So we went to primary care and said, why is this not happening? How can we make it happen? Because now, before it was the thought that we can't do anything about it. Even if we find it, you guys don't have any medicines. So what are we going to do? But now we do have medicines, and we know that the sooner we can get these medicines into the arms of patients, the better the outcome is going to be. And so now we do need to be doing that early detection in primary care and fast-tracking those patients into treatment as quickly as we can. And so what we heard repeatedly from primary care is we're overburdened, we're already asked to do too much, we have so many other processes that we have to do at the annual visit. We want an easy button. And then the other thing was, if someone screens that they might be impaired, we don't know where to refer them to. Do we refer them to neurology? Do we refer them to geriatrics? when I do send referrals, they seem to go into a black hole. Like, we want an easy button, and we want to make sure that the patient is going to get funneled to the right place. And that's really been the key role of the Brain Health Navigator, and the connection of the Brain Health Navigators in the different areas of primary care and neurology.
Yeah, one of the things that we found with Alzheimer's disease, which I would guess would be the case with any very new, innovative space, is you really needed these boundary spanning roles because the workflows weren't there to actually have the friction reduced for the patients and for the system. So what was happening is, guess who was getting to the therapeutics? Rich, white, educated people who had a friend that worked at Lilly, right? I mean, that's not a good health system. So this idea of this boundary spanning role started here at IU. We now have another set of Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative grants going out around the country to see how to replicate these models and make sure that they're reimbursed by Medicare. Because at the end of the day, that is the incentive that works in our health system. So I want to jump down to Katie and to Jared, because you guys work with venture capitalists and funding. And funders get really nervous when they hear about a system that's broken like this. Neuroscience, and specifically Alzheimer's disease, hasn't been a place that people have been flocking to fund until recently. And I'm interested in, when you hear a model like this at IU, what does that make you think about this system? And then also, kind of, what are you hearing around maybe neuro-curious VCs that are looking at wanting to fund and how they make decisions to fund? And does something like this that we have, the ecosystem here at IU, is that interesting for them?
Yeah, so I recently learned that Indiana is the #1 exporter of life sciences in the United States, which you wouldn't think about necessarily as a flyover state. But the integration here is critical. A lot of early stage companies don't think about build with the end in mind. A lot of early stage companies don't necessarily build with the end in mind. Global companies have local employees, as we've discussed. And with the integration in these health systems to get these translational outcomes, where the patients are presenting is where the data is going to be generated. So the hospital systems have to play a critical role. And then when the patients are treated, that's where the patients are going to present as well. So if you're building solutions in this space, but not taking into account where you're going to get the data, right, the biomarker data and all the outcomes data that we need, and then where the patient care is ultimately going to be delivered, you're going to end up with bottlenecks in the system that, right, just aren't going to be easily solvable. Historically, before there were products launched, it was really hard to get to value on a business case with Alzheimer's because the probability of technical success was so low, right? Lilly's a big diabetes company. Insulin works every time. And it's still hard to get patients started on diabetes treatments. In the Alzheimer's space, there's no clear leader yet. There's room for everyone here. I'm not sure which company is going to emerge as the powerhouse 10 years from now. But the solutions that are going to move the fastest are going to be those that take into account all the different players in the healthcare system and find the way to streamline and simplify, not just discovery and development and commercialization, but actually, working this into the workflow so that the patients are getting the medicines that they need.
Yeah, I agree entirely. And on the investor side, I think, and I'm out talking to investors, whether they like neuro or not, all the time, only talking about neuro. So, and in the most, I think in most circumstances, thanks to these recent approvals from Lilly and their donanemab and Eisai and Biogen and lecanemab, and so the recent biomarker approvals too. Even if those aren't, cures for patients, and maybe they aren't meeting the sales milestones like the obesity drugs yet too, it's like that glimmer of hope, knowing how big the issue is, I think still compels us all to think more about investing in this, and maybe we can do it. It's just the hope to kind of get there. And if you just even take a step back and look at maybe where cancer, we talk about, there's lots of investment in cancer. Investors all tend to like to, think that that's an easier pathway, having done cancer companies too. I'm not sure that that's true, but it's just different. But where they started to get into targeted therapy was when a drug called Gleevec was approved, and first it was approved in 2005, I think, or 2004, and it was based on a biomarker. So it's called a Subpart H approval. It's progression, first drug approved on a non-survival only endpoint, progression-free survival. And that was because they had, kind of insight into that type of cancer. It was a gastrointestinal stromal tumor, I think, and it was a FLT3 mutation. And the drug called imatinib targeted that specific mutation. So it was kind of like targeted therapy with biomarkers. And and we're seeing glimmers of hope in that in neurodegeneration and Alzheimer's disease, getting some biomarkers approved for these patients to allow us to think about targeting therapies a little bit more, like we did in cancer in 2005 or whatever, and how that really kind of ramped up. I think that's been this effort. And there's been ups and downs. If you look at like who's investing in neurosciences, whether it's private or public companies, there's been some ebbs and flows where that's been an increase in investment, and then they kind of recoil a little bit more too and kind of come back up. But I do think that the science is getting to the point, as long as you have a system like this, and maybe, I'd say the pharmaceutical companies and the strategic investors are still a little bit reticent to come into this academic type of situation. So I think we do still need, we need biotechs to kind of take a little bit more risk, like Monument, and the early stage investors take a little bit more time and be a little bit patient like that. But I do think, based on the investments that, that we're able to bring into Monument and some of our other neuroscience companies, as well as kind of in Indiana, is a biomarker of that. We do have investors that are very interested to help patients in this disease category, of course, too. And maybe we're getting kind of close enough to the point where we're going to see early stage value creation opportunities that still do advance patient care, at the same time.
So Derek, you made me think of one other point about Indiana. You could describe it as it's a cheap place to live or low cost of living. I'm actually finding it easier to pitch Indiana companies by saying it's a very capital efficient way to get a lot of this work done. Indiana University is the largest medical school, right, in the country, with Purdue University having strong agriculture, right? We've got animal health, all these things combined, and incredible manufacturing capabilities. With all these therapies, if you have the drug but you don't have the delivery mechanism to deliver it, and then manufacturing is expensive and it takes years to build manufacturing. So we have all the pieces and parts we need in Indiana, and we can get things done really fast and in a more capital efficient way than you can do in Boston or San Francisco. So I'm finding it easier to pitch Indiana companies to VC investors than East Coast and West Coast companies.
I live in Lebanon, which is halfway between Lafayette, where Purdue is, and Indianapolis, where IU Medical Center is. And if any of you are from Indiana, you might have heard there's this small investment going on in Lebanon. I think it's now up to $9 billion where Lilly is putting in manufacturing. And part of that is because it sits in a really heavy space between Purdue and IU. But also it's because it's very capital efficient to do that. So a little disruptive on the construction for my little town of 15,000, but it's a very exciting point. And I think the other piece that we haven't brought into this, but I know that BioCrossroads really works on as well, is our policy and government environment, right? So that investment is there because the Indiana Development Economic Group made that happen. We've talked about this being a flyover state, but I'm also here to tell you I think the Indy airport is one of the best in the country and continues to get ratings for that. And you see all those folks actually working together. The Indianapolis airport actually hosts the Alzheimer's Association Promise Garden every year in October for the walk, and makes sure that our airport is a safe and healthy and happy place for people to travel with cognitive impairment. So you just see all these threads coming together, and I think it's something we should be celebrating as Hoosiers. So, and I still don't know what a Hoosier is, so if anybody knows, let me know. So Jared, I want to come back to you about this idea of biomarkers because it's come up several times. So we've talked about cancer. Where cancer was 30 years ago, it was just cancer. Right? There wasn't all these different types of cancer. There weren't all these different types of tumors and things like that. So biomarkers are really, really important, but they're kind of hard to figure out how to get them used in clinical practice. How has that been for you? Because they're actually one of the most important reasons to make an investment in a therapeutic is because you can actually measure what's happening with something that's biological. Have you had to do a lot of negotiation at IU Health to get these new diagnostics used? CMS hasn't made it very easy.
No, certainly not. And I think this is where a lot of the entrepreneurship comes in medicine. We've heard about the basic science, and we've heard about how if we can get a product to market, we can be really successful with that. But one of the things we're not thinking about is how is the healthcare system going to adopt this new treatment? How is it going to adopt this new biomarker? And so often, a company will develop this great and innovative and scientifically appropriate and product that would really change medicine, but if we can't get it into the clinic and get people to use it or get it reimbursed, it's never going to happen. And so we need entrepreneurship. And one of those ways is through this collaborative, the Davos Collaborative that we were a part of, where we got seed money to say, hey, you physicians, create a model of where you can use this new digital biomarker, or you can use a blood biomarker to select patients at the appropriate time for treatment. And so by having seed money, in a sense, we can find those new ways to help evolve the healthcare system into a way that we can support these new products. So I think that's a really important model, whether that comes from outside of a medical system or whether a medical system were to be so innovative as to have its own innovative department where they can supply seed money to do such a thing. Those are really important. And with these new biomarkers, we have new blood-based biomarkers that can diagnose Alzheimer's disease, but we don't know how they're going to get reimbursed. The physicians that need to be using them, our primary care doctors, they're not familiar with having a conversation about Alzheimer's disease in the first place. Oh, I'm diagnosing you with cognitive impairment. But to take it to the next level and say it's Alzheimer's disease or it's dementia or you need care, we can help you. Those are all difficult conversations they're not used to having. So we need to really start from the ground up to be able to use the new technology.
Well, I think one of the things that's key about those grants, because you're right, you did get some seed funding for transformational work. One of the main criteria for which systems got those grants were systems that worked well together and where you had executive buy-in and you could see that the money was going to be used for good and that it was going to actually turn something very quickly. And you don't see that everywhere, but that's something we clearly saw here at IU. I have a couple minutes. Am I allowed to take questions? Is that part of the format? Okay. Does anyone have any questions for the panel?
As a patient or a client, what would the protocol be for a conversation with your primary care physician so that you can get screened pre-symptoms?
Ooh, pre-symptoms.
So I guess I'll start that off. I think a lot of people have some minor symptoms that they might not recognize. And so making sure that we have family members and husbands and wives and partners who speak up and say, you're forgetting a little bit more than I would expect for your age. That's important point number one. But important point number two, as you heard Donna say earlier, we should be screening everyone 65 and over in an annual wellness visit. Medicare says you will screen your patients for a cognitive problem, and we're not doing it. So using new digital cognitive assessments and new tools can help with that process, but everyone should be able to ask their primary care doctor, I want to be screened for cognitive impairment. So that is the absolute first step, and our primary care doctors should be able to run with the ball pretty far these days, and with the support we're building here in Indiana, they should be able to take it all the way through biomarker assessments to be able to streamline people onto treatment.
Yeah, and I think as it relates to the asymptomatic population, we don't actually have the tools or the therapeutics yet. But if you're interested in that, raise your hand and talk to the ADRC because there's some really fantastic trials that are going in that space. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I just wanted to add, because we know that the pathology builds up so much earlier than the symptoms show up. And, Jared's talking about detecting cognitive impairment, primarily because the approval label on these medicines is that you have to have even the earliest stages of cognitive impairment. We do now have the blood biomarkers that can tell us that some of the changes are happening before symptoms, but we don't have any medicines approved for those people yet. Those trials are happening. They're huge trials. They read out in 2027, and I think when they read out, hopefully they're positive. I think they'll be positive. That is going to be a complete paradigm shifting, trial. That now we are going to be doing blood tests the way we do cholesterol tests, and we are going to be treating before symptoms start.
And I can't help myself because the Lancet Commission came out in September of last year with some of the most fantastic information about brain health. One of the reasons it's so important to get your cognitive health assessed is because you're your best baseline. And then you do it every year, and it's not something you wait until something goes wrong before you act. So what the Lancet Commission came out and said is that there are lifestyle changes that you can make that can reduce all-cause dementia by over 40%. Let me stop. Reduce all-cause dementia by over 40% with things that are in your control today. So I always love to especially come to business meetings because it's Mediterranean diet, it's exercise. Quit smoking, people. Come on. We're past. Just quit smoking. Alcohol in moderation, cognitive engagement, social engagement, control your blood pressure, and here's the doozy, 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep every night. Raise your hand if you got 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep last night. Not as many hands as we saw that you know someone with dementia. So get it together. I talk to women a lot. Leave the dirty dishes in the sink. Your husband will get them tomorrow. Go to bed. Okay, yeah.
So I'm from Kansas City, and I run a business incubator. And what we did was we took an old hospital and converted the operating wing into bio-level safety 1 labs. We also have a lot of commercial kitchens. I'm having trouble finding entrepreneurs that need these labs. We also have a shared lab that the local hospital system put in with over $100,000 of lab equipment. Where can I find the people who need these labs? I know they're a rarity, but I have 3 open labs right now, and I would love to get more life sciences in there.
Well, I think it's a good. There's a guy you might want to meet back there that has been recruiting them too at IBRI, and Jay McGill back there with the sunglasses on his head. He just raised his hand, but he can give you some very practical advice for that too. Because at least around here, it was always we don't have any resource, and now IBRI actually is kind of our first and only resource for companies. We have a few companies there for Myluson BioVentures. It's where Monument's based. It's where Sedeo's based. And there's, I think, 18 or 20 new companies that are in there, some using lab spaces, some just using the office spaces. Some of it has to do with, the funding, right? I mean, the ideas might be there. There's a lot of access to CROs and so on for early stage translational research efforts outside of academia. So it usually comes down to money, and then the actual people there to put into lab. So like when we staff a team, it's not always looking for the scientists that go in the lab first. It's usually do we have something that we could send to Jared for a clinical trial, for what we're going to be doing to kind of generate more value sooner. So I think it's and I'm not sure where exactly your facility is too. Sometimes it is also proximity and kind of how close is that to academic areas or industry areas that do have, that type of talent. And I see Vince Wong shaking his head right there. He's also sitting right next to you, this other guy, CEO of BioCrossroads. Also, I mean, we're trying to facilitate and funnel people to IBRI and also kind of build critical mass to build more buildings with that lab resource. So, but it usually has to do with capital, and access to capital, whether it's a grant that somebody receives. You have to have a lab, you have to have a bench, you have to have lab space available to get that SBIR grant. So I think that it is finding the people that are really trying to make that next translational step, looking for commercial venture capital funding or, the types of investments that will lead towards commercialization tend to be, those looking for labs. It's usually not very much, though. Is it maybe a bench or a half a bench, and do you have the resources there to help help that particular area of research? IBRI has chosen to focus on Alzheimer's-related dementia, so neuroscience, metabolism, and rare pediatric oncology. And then that allows them to kind of create a brand for those types of researchers too.
Yeah,
but that's kind of the best I would say.
I would say you've heard it time and time again. There's a value creation loop, right? And we're really lucky that we have BioCrossroads here that helps encourage us to talk to each other, not that we wouldn't anyway, but brings us all together, and there's this kind of virtual creation. We are out of time, but I would like to give each of my panelists one statement to close on. Donna, we'll start with you. What makes you hopeful right now?
What makes me hopeful right now is seeing that we've come to the end of the beginning, right? So we now have these disease-modifying therapies for the first time ever. And we know with other diseases, once you start on that first step, it just propels the field forward so quickly. And I'm seeing so much promise at the conferences with all the new approaches, and people are more willing to take risks now so that's what makes me hopeful is, I think, as you said, inflection point. We've taken that first step on the ladder, and we're just going to keep going, and we'll have so many more drugs.
End of the beginning or the beginning of the end? I'll take either. Jared.
Yes. I guess just really quickly to echo what Donna was saying, for the first time, I feel like people are not looking at Alzheimer's disease and thinking, I can't tell anybody about this, right? It used to be where, if you had cancer, you wouldn't say a word, and now you put it on Facebook and say, I'm getting cured, right? But nobody puts Alzheimer's disease on Facebook. But we're starting to get to the point now with treatments being able to diagnose earlier and earlier that it's not under the same shadow it used to be, and that's how we're really going to move forward, I think.
Katie.
I think it's the folks on this panel. Phyllis Farrell is a force of nature, and if we have people like her, right, pushing this forward, but even hearing you all problem solve the daily blocking and tackling, when you have this ecosystem approach, I see science that's 10 to 15 years before, right, the rest of the market sees it. The science is incredible. There's so much innovation coming, and if we have systems that are functioning this highly, it's going to move so much faster than it did previously. So I'm very excited.
Derek.
Yeah, for me, it's like what's next though too. So now that we're finally at the end of the beginning, and so some new beginning. But it took so long to come up with these new disease-modifying therapies that I think everybody got so focused on making those successful, in some ways, kind of forgot about the patient. So, and I think what's most hopeful for me is that we're now starting to bring it back to the patient, and the companies that we're starting are actually focused on normalizing, brain functions and trying to think more about like a biotech. It's like you're low insulin, well, you take insulin. If we have neuroinflammation, we need to stop that. If we have cognitive impairment due to synaptic dysfunction, we need to make that better. We need to make patients and better, and quality of life better, and memory better, and so that will help caregivers in the whole system. And I think everybody's finally starting to think about that.
I think that's my hope as well, is Alzheimer's disease. My daddy was diagnosed in 2012, 6 months after I was asked to take the Alzheimer's job at Lilly. I don't think that was a coincidence. None of the innovations that we have today were available for him. The experience with my family would have been completely different, and they had to deal with it by themselves in their kitchen, not even talking with their friends and family about it. And here we are at a global entrepreneurship conference with the daggone brain health and Alzheimer's on the main stage. And so I just think, for me, the fact that we're bringing this disease out of the closet, we're having conversations about our brain health, we're fixing all of the brokenness in the system, means that my son, who happens to look exactly like my dad, will not get this disease. And that's what I do every day and why I get up, and I'm so thankful for all of you being here with us today.